Thank you. Senator Massicotte.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for both of you being with us. I'd like to just recite a little bit what I hear from you, but very short, just maybe make it very clear and for the record. First of all, both of you favor decriminalization of marijuana. Am I correct in saying that? Or legalization, exactly. And then both of you acknowledge that the proposed legislation would be in contradiction of our existing treaty obligations. Agreed? But in spite of that, you say, for all the good reasons you espouse, that Canada should irrespectively proceed with its legislation relative to our Canadian stance. Agree with that? And having said that, you also say, meanwhile, there's very low probability of direct sanctions from other countries, if I hear that correctly. And you sort of say, though, contrary a little bit what we heard from our Canadian officials, which basically says we're going to do nothing, you say we should be much more proactive of explaining, if you wish, the moral arguments or the global health arguments of why we're proceeding this way. And Mr. Jelsma, in particular, you put emphasis on the per se approach. But what you're basically saying is Canada, just don't sit in your hands and do this stuff. Take the proactive, at least look good morally, if you wish, to make sure that people understand you're being responsible, irrespectively of contradicting a treaty obligation. Is that also a good summary of what I heard?
Yeah, I think it is. I think I would only, on the last point, suggest that, in our view, Canada already is speaking clearly from the in terms of the rationale for its policy change. From the very beginning at the CND in Vienna and at the UNGAS was very clear the why of the policy change. I also think that what I heard the government say is that there are no plans for action now with regard to the treaties. Our view is that there's no rush for Canada. The important thing is to make sure that it is gotten right. And the important thing is to make sure that other countries know that Canada is exploring its options and that it is not enough just to acknowledge noncompliance and consider the issue done. Canada, I think, in good faith, should send signals that it is exploring what it intends to do, but it has no, I don't think, obligation to tell countries what that is until they're good and ready.
In fact, I like that summary. I also, from the options available to it, you sort of discount, 4 or 5 options. You discount the in and out or out or in. Like some countries have done. I think one country has done that, where you retract and you come back in with a reservation. You don't recommend that. You also do not recommend, I understand, the other choice is to basically, you can negotiate the list of what drugs are included in that, but I think you both acknowledge that's a good idea, but that's many, many years in the works, I suspect, given that the preponderance of countries are much more conservative, and therefore we're probably not going to get consensus on that. And I gather that's why you like the per se approach, which allows a fragmented but morally substantial approach. Is that a good summary also?
Yeah. The inter se approach is not only a moral direction to go in. It is a legal procedure that would, in fact, resolve the legal conflict with the treaty. The advantage is also that it is done in a more coordinated manner, no? And that's the advantage over the unilateral withdrawal and readherence with reservation, which is an option that is definitely available to Canada.
And the per se approach, how many countries do we need to be credible to get results there? Is it a majority or just a significant number?
No, the procedure is that 2 or more countries can agree among themselves to modify certain treaty provisions. The procedure of objections that other countries may have against it is a bit less clear than in the case of the reservations. Now, in the case of reservations, it is clear that at least for the 1961 Single Convention, other countries have a year the time to object to a reservation, like Canada has done with Bolivia. And if there are more than 1/3 of treaty parties, which for the Single Convention comes down to 62 or so, would object, then the reservation is basically declared unlawful. In the case of Bolivia, it only came to like 18, so far from that threshold. So in that sense, it does create a legal precedent, no, that which makes it also a viable option in principle for Canada to do in the case of cannabis. But the advantage of inter se is that on the one side, it is even more difficult for other countries to object or to hold or to declare the inter se agreement unlawful. And the advantage, I think, for the global control system is that, if there is a more chaotic scenario of all countries trying to solve it unilaterally, that creates.
Am I correct though? And I think we hear you loud and clear, and your position paper also makes it very clear. But am I correct that Canadians should expect, in spite of all our best efforts, we will probably be in contravention, in legal contravention of treaties for many years, probably at least a decade? Is that accurate?
Now, at the moment, an inter se agreement would be reached with a group of countries. From that moment on, Canada is no longer in breach with the treaties. So it depends on.
So it's an easy slam dunk in your mind.
It has the effect of a collective reservation.
If it's so easy, why doesn't the Canadian government come up and say this is our plan?
Because the procedure is not used often, so in that sense it is contested, but it is specifically designed for moments of paralysis around international treaties. So we do think it is, in fact, probably the best option to now start working on. It requires careful consultations with other parties, because it is like negotiating a small treaty to specify which provisions are no longer applicable to this group of countries, but also to specify to the other parties, and promise that they will maintain their obligations to the other parties that are not party to the inter se agreement.
I think your view